Okay, so now I want to welcome you to tonight's Rosh Hashanah messages. Very, very briefly, just want to mention this is a program that is brought to you by Core Connects Rhode Island, the goal of which is to connect Jewish women with each other, originally in Rhode Island, but now with Zoom, we have the capacity to go all over the place. If you are making background noise, please mute yourself, or I'm happy to mute you for you. We do have a couple of programs which I'd like to promote for those of you who live in the area, one of which is on the Sunday before Yom Kippur. I have secured the use of the Providence mikveh for anybody who would like to have an immersion, like to go into the mikveh and to kind of come out new and refreshed and start the new year going through that transitional waters of the mikveh. And I'm happy to talk about it in more detail if you'd like to know more about it or you're interested in it. It is not dependent on your age or your religious affiliation or anything. Anybody can go to the mikveh at that time. So I have 11 to 2 on the Sunday before Yom Kippur. I have the mikveh available, so be in touch or go on the website. And I have a sukkah. Can come drop in on my sukkah on Thursday of Sukkahs. The date's on the again on the website. So everything's on the website, and we have a book group coming up. So please take a look at everything that's on the website. And so this program, the goal of this program is really to introduce you to some of my dear friends who live in other parts of the country. Judy's obviously UK is a local. Who are teachers and who are, to me, very inspirational women. And I have asked them to, for those of you who were able and were around last year to listen to the messages we had last year, but essentially I asked them to please speak a little bit about how they're approaching the season. What does this season mean to them? How are you feeling about the season? Like as we're in the month of Elul, we're getting very close to Rosh Hashanah. Monday night is Rosh Hashanah, as you all know. And there's a lot of work that people do in this time to kind of reflect and to think about who they are and what they want for the new year and where they're going and all of that. And so I have invited these lovely women, Sharon Freundel, Rabbi Gila Langner, Bat-Shelva Geltuk, and Judy, to offer us some of their thoughts in this season. And I think the only one who was here last year speaking was Sharon. And I'll tell you the order that we have for tonight. So Gila is going to start us off, followed by Sharon, followed by Bat-Sheva, followed by Judy K. So that's our lineup. And it is recorded, so you can all listen to it again if you want to, or share it with your friends, because I really think that, that there'll be things that we can think about for our own lives and how they relate to us and what we're looking to, how we're looking to approach the season. So my dear friend Gila Langner, one of the first people I met in Washington, D.C. when I moved to America. Gila, at that time, actually worked for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and has since working at the EPA, has become a rabbi. Her father was a conservative rabbi. She's a rabbi of Kol Ami, the Northern Virginia Reconstructionist community in Arlington, Virginia. She was ordained in 2003, and she has worked as a chaplain, adjunct professor, Hebrew school principal, adult education teacher, and co-editor of the journal Kerem. Her first career, I mentioned, was in the EPA, and she is originally from Montreal. She lives in Washington, D.C., and she enjoys doing the New York Times spelling bee with her husband and son. So Gila, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be here with everybody, and especially with you, Alyssa, and Sharon. It's so good to be together again. So I was wondering if we might make the bracha over Torah study, if that's okay. Join hands or put your hands near the corners of your picture box. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. to soak ourselves in Torah, that is of Torah. So what's on my mind as we enter the high holiday season? Honestly, what isn't on my mind? What a time this is. It's been such a year of turmoil. I don't know if any of us have gone through that kind of turmoil in our society. So many losses, much division, so much just difficult times, one thing after another. And I think there's a bewildering quality to our situation right now. I think we had in our minds last year that, well, we know it will end, the pandemic, we'll know, we'll be all together again. And right now, I think we feel, I don't know when, I don't know how, we don't know exactly what we're supposed to do. There's a line in the daily prayer called Tachanun, supplications, that comes after the Amida, and it goes, Va'anachnu lo neda, we don't know ma na'aseh, what we're going to do. Va'anachnu lo neda, we don't know what we're going to do. Ki alecha einenu, so our eyes are looking upward, outward to God, inward, in all these directions to find some guidance to get us through this. And I think even those who have been fortunate enough to have come through this last year and a half relatively unscathed, we've still been shaken by the experience, shaken to see how divided our country is, shaken to see how vulnerable we are to the virus, to public health inadequacies, to supply chain disruptions, all these different parts of our vulnerability, shaken just to see our world turn upside down so quickly. The last time it felt that the world turned upside down, for me, I think was 20 years ago, when 9/11 happened, and Shabbat Shuvah is the 20th anniversary of it. And I remember how aghast we were at the loss of 3,000 plus people to that terror attack. But now, as our losses mount to over 600,000 from COVID, I think we start to become numb. We're just becoming inured to the magnitude of the deaths. It reminds me of this book that was written, I don't know how many of you remember this book, by Milan Kundera. It was from maybe the 70s, I think. It was called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, I don't even remember what the plot was about, but the title just keeps floating in my mind. The knowledge that our lives are so easily taken, turned around, lost on such a scale, it's just unbearable. So how do we make sense of our lives when the ground keeps shifting? And how do we absorb so much change? This is what I think biblical scholar Aviva Zornberg meant when she called this theological vertigo. I love that. Kind of a dizzying feeling that the ground suddenly gives way under you. And of course, theological vertigo is exactly what our Torah reading for second day Rosh Hashanah is all about, right? The Torah reading is the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. It's the story of Abraham taking the beloved son that he and Sarah have been waiting for, praying for their entire adult lives, and following what he hears as God's command to sacrifice his son on the mountaintop. Isaac survives, but Sarah dies almost immediately afterwards in the next parasha, next portion. And our rabbis learn from this juxtaposition of life and death that Sarah died in some way because of the Akedah, right? Rashi explains, as a result of the news of the Akedah, that her son was prepared for the slaughter, was almost slaughtered. In the Hebrew, it's v'chimat shelo nishchat. As a result, her soul flew out of her and she died. In other words, when Sarah found out what Abraham intended to do, the ground just shifted under her. The Midrash tells us she screamed 6 times, corresponding to the 6 tekiah notes of the shofar. And then, as Aviva Zornberg describes it, she died, quote, of the truth of kimat shelo nishchat, of that hair's breadth that separates death from life. That phrase, kimat shelo nishchat, that Rashi uses, it doesn't make grammatical sense as far as my Hebrew grammar goes, which is admittedly not that far. But it sort of means he almost wasn't slaughtered. You would think Rashi would say he almost was slaughtered. Right? We know, and Sarah apparently knew, or at least some of the Midrash indicate, that she knew that Isaac survived. 500 years after Rashi, Rabbi Yehuda Loew, known as the Maharal of Prague, came along to suggest a different reading. He made a play on words. So that word kimat, almost, in Kimat Shelo Nishchad, he says it's like kimuat, something small. Right? He wrote, it seems that because Sarah heard that Isaac was almost slaughtered, that just a small thing, davar mu'at, kept him from being slaughtered. For this reason, she was shocked. This is the way of humanity, to be shocked upon hearing that only a small thing kept one alive. To be shocked upon hearing that only a small thing kept one alive. It's so true, right? How often do you hear about somebody who almost took an airplane, but just because of traffic, it was a doomed airplane and they didn't get on because of some traffic thing? Or the people who happened that day to have a meeting outside the Twin Towers where they worked on September 11th. The people in Surfside whose apartment numbers ended in 09 instead of 10, right? Small little things, just random things. Kimat shelo nishchat, kept them from being slaughtered. But that's what undid Sarah, that knowledge that the line between life and death had become vanishingly small, that it depended on an accident or a small twist of fate. And that shock of how tenuous life is, I think, threatened her very existence. If such a thing can happen, if my being is so unbearably light, what is the meaning of my life? Something so small, a hairbreadth, stands between life and death. So our people were no strangers to plagues and disasters that can cause theological vertigo, the sense that the world around us can be ripped away. And we had many different ways of barreling through those very tough times, century after century. There was a great Italian plague of 1630. And there was a rabbi who wrote a book called Olam Hafuch, the world turned upside down, right? I mean, like you could take it from Hamilton, or you could take it right from the way we feel about our lives, right? That everything changed. And the people turned to the liturgy, they turned to prayers like Avinu Malkeinu and the confessional, the vidui that we still say, to pray for God's mercy. And they followed some of the advice of the Talmud, either to get out of town or to lock themselves in their homes to handle this kind of disaster. But the disaster, of course, it is our template for how to live in this world, was the disaster 2,000 years ago. Of course, the destruction of the temple. There's an anthology called Torah, I don't have it right here, Torah in a Time of Plague, edited by Rabbi Aaron Leib Smokler. And it's a really marvelous anthology. And she points to a well-known passage in the Talmud where the rabbis reflected on what happened after the destruction of.
Gila, you muted yourself.
Oh, I don't know how I did that.
Okay, so reflected on the rabbis.
Right. So they reflected on what happened after the destruction. And some Jews went into a mourning so profound that they refused to eat meat or drink wine. So Rabbi Yehoshua asked them, what's going on? And they said, well, wine and meat, that's associated with the altar in the temple. So we can't have any of that anymore. And Rabbi Yehoshua said, all right, so you know what? Don't eat bread either, because they used to have grain offerings in the temple too. So they said, okay, we won't eat bread because we can do without that. And then they said, well, we'll do without fruit because we can't bring our first fruits either. And finally he said to them, well, what about water? There used to be a water libation in the temple. You're going to do without water? And they went silent and realized they can't do without water. So Rabbi Yehoshua said to them this famous line, my children, not to mourn at all is impossible, but to mourn excessively is also impossible. Instead, here's what you do. When you plaster your house, you leave a little area without plaster to remember the destruction. When you prepare a meal, you leave out a small item to remember. You build something, leave something undone. Feast, but maybe without one dish, right? You can dress up, but maybe minus one ornament. Go ahead and marry, but remember under the chuppah, and this one, of course, we still do very much so, when you smash the glass, you remember that life is not whole. In other words, incorporate, acknowledge the memory of the destruction with some small act, davar mu'at, kimat, something small, to acknowledge what has happened, but not to allow yourself to lose life's larger meaning. You take that davar mu'at and you build that into a life-affirming ritual. And I think that's what we have done on Rosh Hashanah with the Akedah. What do? We lift up the ram's horn, right? The ram that was caught in the thicket and that substituted for Isaac as a sacrifice. But that ram's horn, that shofar, comes to signify and honor also the sacrifice of Sarah, who could not bear to live in a world such as this, as well as the faith of Abraham and ourselves, who try to carry on and affirm life's goodness, even in the face of great suffering. Let's give it a shot. Mm-hmm.
Love it, Gila. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you. Thank you for your reflections. Thank you for your shofar blowing, taking the breath and pushing it out and leading us through this little walk through the line between life and death, and how fine that is and how tenuous it is, and the little things that we do that are important. So thank you so much. So now actually Gila and Sharon Freundel are friends. So that's nice that we're handing the baton on to Sharon Freundel, who I've also known a super long time, since my early days in America, in Washington, DC. Very fortunate to be part of a shul community, and that has been very meaningful throughout my entire life. So Sharon and I reconnected a few years ago, and it's really a great pleasure to be reunited with you, Sharon. Sharon, I guess a long time ago, went to Stone College, was a nurse in her former iteration. And then she started teaching Torah. And it's quite a long CV, which is very impressive. Spiritual guidance counselor, head of rabbinics of a school in the DC area, director of Hebrew and Judaic studies, and subsequently director of Jewish life at the Milton Gottesman Jewish Day School of the nation's capital. She is now the managing director of the Jewish Education Innovation Challenge, a national organization whose mission is to catalyze radical improvement in Jewish day schools. She's taught pretty much all over the world, adult Jewish education, and the list goes on, but she's really my dear friend who I see as being very wise and very thoughtful and very informed. And I'm very excited to hear what you have to say, Sharon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you to everyone who's here. It was fascinating listening to Gila, because this was a year where the same themes, I have a feeling, informed all our lives. And so you're going to hear some similar tropes, but I'm taking it in a somewhat different direction than Gila took it. As Alyssa mentioned a few minutes ago, I did have the privilege of speaking with you last year at this time. It was the middle of August. It was in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. And as Gila mentioned, I don't think anybody could have predicted that a full year later, we would still be struggling with similar pandemic issues. But I've got to admit, we're a lot more knowledgeable now than we were last year about preventing COVID, about treating it, about ways to have children go back to school while keeping them and the adults around them safe. Not that this country has arrived at a meeting of minds on any of this, but at least we have a lot more information. So down where I live, outside of Washington, D.C., the synagogues opened up again for inside prayer services during the last week of May. And finally, for the first time in 15 months, I went back to shul. As the service progressed, I kept saying to myself, wow, this is the first time I've said this prayer that requires a minyan, a quorum, in 15 months. Or this is the first time I've sat here in my seat in 15 months. Or this is the first time I've seen this person in real life versus Zoom. And I was really doing okay until they took the Torah out of the ark for Torah reading. And by the time the Chazan, the prayer leader, was singing the Shema before walking around with the Torah, I was sobbing. Seeing a Torah, my Torah, the Torah that God gave my people 3,300 years ago, seeing it in person for the first time in 15 months was absolutely overwhelming. Never in my life have I gone 15 months without being in the presence of a Sefer Torah. And at that moment, I realized just how much I had missed it. To be in a room with the scroll containing the ancient words of God was something that I really missed. Reading out of the Chumash, a printed Bible, was a mere shadow of the experience of sharing space with the Torah scroll, which, in fact, in many ways, we treat the way we would treat a person. We rise when it rises, we kiss it when we see it, we bury it when it's no longer viable. I felt in some way whole again, and I've gone to shul every Shabbat since, even with a mask or a double mask. For me personally, this is true succor for my soul. Now, last year when I spoke to you, I focused my remarks mostly on my relationship with God. That is as strong as ever and even more present in my liturgical life now that I get to go back to shul at least once a week. And this year, I've been thinking about our relationship with God's children, that is, our human brothers and sisters around the world. And it does seem like the world's falling apart. Going to hell in a handbasket, as my father of blessed memory would have said, apart from the COVID pandemic. Women and men in Afghanistan are now struggling to leave, fearing for their lives and being forced to turn the clock back years, if not centuries.
I thought, wow, that was fast.
Thousands are dead after an earthquake in Haiti, and the survivors got pelted by a hurricane shortly thereafter, not to mention Hurricane Ida slamming into Louisiana just yesterday, and fatal flash flooding that hit Europe and the south and west coasts of the United States. The single hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth happened last month, and wildfires are out of control. Competing political protests happen in my neck of the woods, often on a regular basis, with fistfights between opponents breaking out. Sexual harassment and abuse charges, they're surfacing from the highest level of politics and religion down to the person on the street. I dare say God is not happy, although I would not presume to speak for the divine. I guess what I mean is, how could God be happy while seeing us destroy this beautiful world given to us and watching us treat other people in the most awful ways? Maybe it's time that in addition to elevating our relationship with God, we elevate our relationship with all of God's children. Many years ago, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. I disagree with much of Rabbi Kushner's theology, but one thing has remained with me in the decades since I read the book. He says that when something happens to us, the question we should be asking is not, why did this happen to me? The question we should be asking is, Now that this has happened, how do I respond? In my mind, this applies in geometrically stronger ways to when bad things happen to other people. Just as I said before, tongue in cheek, I can't presume to speak for God. I believe in my deepest heart that no one should ever hazard an opinion on why something awful has happened to someone else. When I was a senior in high school, I went to an ultra-Orthodox school because it was the only Jewish school and a girls' school at that time in the city in which I grew up, which is why I attended it. When I was a senior, the Israeli athletes were murdered at the Munich Olympics. The principal of my school gathered us in the assembly room, and among other things, this rabbi stated that the Israeli athletes were killed because they were going to compete on Shabbat and violating the laws of Shabbat. So I stood up, and in my 17-year-old zeal and my loudest voice, I looked at the man and I said, "Who died and left you, God of the world?" Now, today I would probably temper my words, but the sentiment would be the same. How dare anyone second-guess God and opine that COVID has come upon the world because, pick one, women aren't dressing modestly, we're speaking Lashon Hara, gossiping about our friends and neighbors, we're accepting people as they see themselves to be rather than pigeonholing them into boxes we artificially create. We're being tested to see if we believe in God or in science, and on and on. No one should be asking why anything happens to anyone other than themselves. When something happens in my life, I may choose to do a cheshbon nefesh, an introspection, to determine if there's something in my soul, in my personality, that I would like to improve. That's the very essence of tshuva, of repentance. But how dare I try to do a cheshbon nefesh on anyone else's soul? And here's where Rabbi Kushner's question comes in. The metaphysical reason for any event is immaterial in the immediate. The first question everyone needs to ask is, now that this person or these people are in need, how can I help? Whether it's providing supplies for Afghan refugees, doing what I can to slow climate change, or maintaining peaceful and civil discourse, even with those with whom I vehemently disagree, I, as even one person, can make a difference. There's an old story told of a man walking on a beach where thousands of starfish have washed up on the shore. And he sees a little boy walking, picking up a starfish, throwing back in the ocean, and the boy does this over and over again. So the man says to the boy, "Do you really think you're going to make a difference?" And as the boy throws another starfish back into the ocean, he replies, "To that one starfish I am." Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, whose ongoing wisdom is sorely missed, said during the Syrian refugee crisis, "After the Holocaust, we helped the refugees because they were Jewish. Now we help the refugees because we are Jewish." I think this applies to any disaster emanating from nature or from human behavior that occurs in our world. We are Jews. We are bidden to address the ensuing needs to the best of our ability. It's part of what it means to be Jewish. I learned years ago in my Jewish communal work as a rabbanit, as a rebbitzin, that if you want somebody to take positive notice of you, treat their children well. If we want God to take positive notice of us and give us a blessed 5782, let us treat the Almighty's children, and parenthetically, the earth that was given to us, well. Being kind and compassionate to everyone we meet is a wonderful portal to creating deeper, more solid relationship with the one above. I encourage everyone, take care of everyone else, and then we will all be taken care of. And in the merit of that, May God grant you who are here tonight, your families, the Jewish people, and the world at large, a safe, healthy, peaceful, prosperous, and serene 5782. Thank you.
Oh, Judy and Sharon, I feel like I have to take a big breath here. That was very powerful and very, very real. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I amen your blessing to all of us. And actually, one thing that I learned the other day from Erica Brown, who's another teacher, writer in your community, and she suggested that one thing that we could be doing every day is to compliment somebody else, compliment 5 people and document what you say to that person. So not like, I like your shoes, but like, you are a very wonderful teacher, or I really appreciate this about you, or something that's very complimentary, and do it 5 times and write it down, and do it for a week and see how you feel at the end of the week. So that's my, that I think speaks to this idea of trying to see with lenses that see positive and try to fix things and see the good in everybody and everyone, even if we disagree with what they say or what they do. So thank you, Sharon. So now I'm not sure where Batsheva is, but Batsheva is probably on the screen somewhere. I'm sure she is. I'd like to invite my relatively new friend, Batsheva Geltor, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. I interacted with her many, many times on trips to Israel that we used to run before COVID. And then when my children used to live in Atlanta, it was always a great pleasure and a great joy to be with her and to learn from her. She was originally born in, I didn't realize she was born in New York. I thought she was born in Jerusalem, but she was born in New York.
I was raised there, just born in New York. Blip on the radar.
Okay, fine. Raised in Jerusalem. She attended seminaries, she had a BA in psychology and a master's in social work. She is a Georgia State licensed social worker, but she is really passionate and very effective in Jewish women's education and psychology of human beings. She's the co-director of Jewish Women, JWC, Jewish Women's Council?
Community,
where she is committed to providing programming for Jewish women across Atlanta. She brings her love of people and deep understanding of human nature to everything she does. And I am very, very excited to hear what Batsheva will share with us. I know she shares a lot on Instagram and on her Facebook page and on so many different ways in which she gets her light and her Torah out into the world. So I'm looking forward to your words, Batsheva. And you gave me permission to cut you off if you go too long. So
by all means. So first of all, I want to thank Sharon and Rabbi Gila. I don't see your last name, Rabbi Gila. I'm sorry, and it's cut off over there. I apologize, but you both spoke so beyond beautifully and inspiring. I thought I'd use the time when the other speakers were speaking to prepare something to say, but not that I didn't prepare beforehand, I'm just saying, but I got so consumed in what you were saying and the beautiful, powerful, breathtaking messages that you gave, really. Thank you so, so much. And Alyssa, I want to say something about you that you said about complimenting someone and Sharon just mentioned that if we want God to look at us favorably, we should take care of his children. So I, not that long ago, was going through a really tough time. And I have to say that, Alyssa, you probably don't even know the impacts of this. But every week she would text me to wish me good Shabbos. Thick or thin, oftentimes I couldn't respond. I was, just dealing with a whole lot of moving parts on my plate. But every time I got that, it was this incredibly powerful, loving, caring, compassionate gesture. And I think that's really who you are. And I so appreciate that. And I know that I'm sure everyone here that knows you knows this about you. You care so deeply about God and his children. So thank you so much for everything you do and for this opportunity. So Rosh Hashanah and the whole Chagim come for me personally after, and for all of us, but after the month of Elul. which happens to be a really charged month in general. But it's also the month that my dear father, of blessed memory, passed away 6 years ago. He was only 58 years old when he passed away. And, you know, I still can't talk about it without crying, I guess. But he was probably one of the brightest, most beautiful people you would have ever met. And he was all about love of God and love of his people. And love of every human. Actually, not when he would take pictures, when he would come to visit me in Atlanta, he would take pictures of the foliage, like as we're driving to Kroger's. Like, it was the most embarrassing thing, as you know, like I was like, like this is not like a tourist area, you know, like he would stop the car, everyone's like waiting, and he's taking pictures of like the trees, like on the way to Kroger's, which is our shopping place in case they don't have those up north. And that's who he was. He saw the beauty in everything and everyone. And so for me, Rosh Hashanah over the past 6 years has been really a revisiting spot, not just for my own personal journey and the journey of that of my children and, you know, where I am in the world and where the world around me is and what I could do better and what have you, but really an accounting of sorts of a bigger picture, you know, of life and how vulnerable we are, and how powerful an impact we could have long after we are gone. So for this year, my focus is memory, and I want to share with you why. Rosh Hashanah is known as the day of remembrance. We mention remembering and memory a lot in the prayers of Rosh Hashanah. And all of our commentators are baffled by the fact that a God who's presumably all powerful takes the time to remember, right? Because remembering to us usually means that we have forgotten something. And it's interesting because the word tru'ah, which is one of the beautiful sounds that Rabbi Gila had blown from the shofar, it's the most broken up of all the sounds. It's, I think, 9 broken up of a whole. So 9 of a whole. The word tru'ah actually comes from the root bad, ra. And the understanding oftentimes in Kabbalistic teachings is that what we view as bad is oftentimes just a blockage, a disconnection from a point of origin, from ourselves, from each other, right? So we label it perhaps as human beings sometimes bad, but it's not necessarily that. It is sometimes we get obscure, our vision gets obscured, and we don't see the beauty that lies within. There's a beautiful story about a rabbi that just passed away, and I can't remember his name because I have an issue with names. I'm so grateful that your names are written over there. It's something I actually share in common with my dad, or shared in common with my dad. He just passed away. His day of passing, he was Rabbi Abdallah something or other. He was the chief rabbi in Iraq a while ago. And he taught, the following story said about him. In the month before Rosh Hashanah, an individual, a congregant, came over to him and started lamenting about how painful his life journey has been and how much he's messed up and how disappointed he was in himself. And when he finished, the rabbi listened very compassionately throughout the entire story. And when he finished, the rabbi said, "Ve," which in Hebrew means and the guy says, no, I don't think you understand. My story like ends here. Like, this is how bad it is. Like it ends here. I really messed up epically. And there's no like correction. There's no like beautiful wrap up with a bow. Like, this is where my story ends. And the rabbi looked at him and said, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. It never ends where we think we messed up, we tripped up, we are disappointed in ourselves and each other, in the world, and the chaos that we are currently in, at large. We get to write whatever chapter it is that we want to. And that is, and that's truly who we are. The word for and, right, that connection word that he asked him is ve, the letter vav, which implies connection. That's a whole nother story that I won't get into, but I mean, I won't unpack over here. I won't open up because I don't have time to unpack. But the word of connection, right? Going back to our source, right? When we said Teruah is breaking away from our source, the day of remembrance, Rosh Hashanah is a day of remembrance. Every time I left my house as a teenager, my dad would say to me, Batsheva, remember who you are. And he'd say that to my siblings also. We hated it as teenagers. We rolled our eyes internally and externally, I'm embarrassed to say. And I wish I could go back and hear him say it again. And I wish I could ask him what he meant by that. But the truth is, I don't really have to, because when my siblings and I talk, we know exactly what he meant. He meant when you go out into that world and you're confronted by the various painful, inevitable challenges that you are going to be confronted with, don't ever forget how powerful, how beautiful, how internally bright, and always internally connected, even when you feel disconnected, you are. And I think that when we talk about Rosh Hashanah being the day of remembrance, what we're really talking about is the reality that we need to remember. As my dad would say, remember who you are. We have to remember who we are because we forget. We get into these arenas where we're in this gridlock of political discord, and individual discord, and familial challenges. And we are so scared and operating from so much fear, especially with this pandemic and what have you. And we forget that we have all the answers within us and within each other. And all we have to do is shed those layers that disconnect us from each other and reach in deep into ourselves. Remember who we are. Remember what we're made of. There's a beautiful idea about the honey. And every year I learn this, and every year, you know, it hits a different spot, you know, in terms of my own journey. But we dip our apple in honey, and all the commentators ask, why not in sugar? Sugar is perhaps more tasty, more appealing to a lot of people. Honey has a property that sugar doesn't have. Honey is self-preserving. It imbibes that which falls into it. There's actually an interesting Jewish law. It's one of the only substances, or the only substance, where you can't really make it not kosher. You know, you could, like, if something falls into it, no matter how big a piece of non-kosher food, you could just take it out and the honey remains kosher, which is different than other materials. Again, not unpacking that over here, but it's actually referring to the DNA of honey. Honey doesn't change its form, no matter what happens. It never changes its form. It doesn't spoil. And which I didn't know that. And I checked with, if there's any scientists over here that would like to disconfirm that or confirm that, please let me know. I'm definitely not. I did social sciences like straight through. So I apologize, but I did speak to some scientists who did confirm this. I might have my facts slightly off, but somewhat, this is an accurate statement. And I think that that's why we dip our apples in honey and our challah in honey, because we're really trying to dip ourselves back into ourselves, to remind ourselves that we could have messed up epically. And boy, did we and will we mess up epically. But we are always, always able to come back to that point of origin. There's a image that Bob Falconer, who's an amazing therapist out in California, and he shares this two beautiful analogies. He says one of them is like this idea of the soul being completely pure and never changing. He says, when there's a storm, now in Louisiana, there's a storm in our hearts, and prayers, I'm sure, are with everyone over there, that they're safe, that they're not scared, that they're able to rebuild that which is destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. But when there's a storm, it can obscure the sun completely. It can even destroy your house. It can destroy anything. But when that storm is over, the sun remains intact. In fact, it was never changed. Its form never changed whatsoever. It might have been blocked, but it was still there. And that's how our soul, our self-energy, each other's self-energy, godliness is. It never changes its form, no matter what. It may be obscured, but it never changes its form. And the other analogy he gives is that of the night sky. And he says, if you take a binoculars and you look into the night sky, you may see some stars. I don't know how it is up north. Over here in Atlanta, also not so many, but I've been out to California actually camping and to Oregon, and you could really see stars like in the sky. It's really magnificent. But if you have a really good telescope, you could be looking at that same sliver of night that you looked at just with your own bare eyes. And you can see so many things, right? And if you have a really, really good telescope and a really good, you know, whatever equipment that you are looking through, you could see then, you know, all the way back in time, perhaps even all the way to Big Bang. Well, that's what he says. I don't know. I didn't check that scientifically. I just listened to him again today because I do quite often. But he usually, you know, is quite reliable. So that same sliver of sky that looked obscured or you didn't even see the stars, it didn't change its form. You just got a better piece of equipment. And now you can see that very same sliver of sky and you can see it clearly for the beauty and the depth and the light that exists within it or always existed within it. You just might have not encountered that or might have not seen it without the proper equipment.
Shiva, I'm giving you a 30-second warning.
30-second one? Okay, great, perfect. Rosh Hashanah is that binoculars for us. It gives us the opportunity to remember who we are, to remember who each other is. And no matter how much time passes, we're only 12 months away, less than 12 months away. We're only really 6 months away from the nearest station of remembrance, right? Of Rosh Hashanah, right? That place where we immerse ourselves back into ourselves. And I think that's what it means when it says that God remembers. He doesn't forget who we are. He helps us encounter that beauty that we've always been and we sometimes have forgotten ourselves.
Oof, beautiful. Thank you, Batsheva. I like those analogies. They're very graphic, and they really give us a sense of trying to get in touch with the fact that we have that shining soul inside of all of us. I thought you were going to say when your father says, remember who you are, remember that you're godly. Remember you have that godly soul. Maybe that's what he was saying to you.
I think that's what godly means.
Yeah, right. Yeah, really amazing message. And you are shining that light. So thank you for shining your light on us today. And Judy, I'm really sorry that you have to follow all these amazing women.
Great.
It's really great, and you have your Torah, and I want you to share that with us. So Judy is a friend from down the block. We live literally 1 block away from each other, and I've known Judy also as long as I've been in Providence, Rhode Island, 20-something years. Judy's very involved in the Jewish Renewal Movement and is co-leader of the Soulful Shabbat at Temple Emmanuel in Providence, Rhode Island. Professionally, she designs and facilitates training on diversity, equity, and inclusion for business, government, and nonprofit organizations. She also officiates at Jewish and interfaith life cycle events. She has 3 grown children, one of whom recently got married, Mazel Tov, and beautiful family, beautiful person. I'm looking forward to hearing your Torah, Judy.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I decided to get really personal and share with you what I do around high holidays, some of what is coming up for me this year, and hopefully encourage people to also weigh in. So is there anybody else of people who have their video screen on, even if you just physically raise your hand, I can see you. Is there anybody else who, like me, really resists the coming of the high holidays? Like midsummer comes and like you realize that Tisha B'Av is coming up, or Elul is starting in a couple of weeks, or you're starting to have to plan for high holidays because you're a leader, or you're involved in logistics or something, and you're just like, no, not yet. I don't want this to happen yet. Anyway, I saw a couple of hands go up. So that is all that comes up for me every single year, and particularly this year because Rosh Hashanah is early, right? We have our early and late holidays, and I'm sure it's just about resisting facing the passage of time, that relentless cycle, which is both, sustaining. I mean, it's just that circle of life, the beautiful cycle of our tradition, but, it represents the passage of time. And and how fleeting it is, and how, every year we're closer to the end of our lives and the end of the lives of the people we care about. So every year I'm like kicking and screaming initially, and then slowly I come to terms with it. At some point, Tisha B'Av started getting much more meaningful for me. It particularly happened at a time of great political upheaval, as Sharon was describing, so much upheaval this year and in so many different years. But one year it like finally clicked for me that, gee, Judaism has this great holy day where we can just completely fall apart and just acknowledge all the despair and destruction and devastation in the world, in our lives, on the planet, to the Jewish people, to other people. And I started getting really into it. And even though it's painful, it was a great, it just created this great vehicle for being able to get together with other people, share what was on our mind and hearts, grieve all the injustices and suffering in our lives and in the world, and give support to each other, and do what we could to feed hope. Kaveh Eliyah, to cultivate hope in God, in the rightness of the world, and just accepting what is. So I'm still very resistant to it. But what I found is, then I get eventually to sort of a tipping point where then I'm like all in. It's like, okay, it's that time of year again, and it's now or never, right? Now's when you do that life review. Now's when you get realigned. Everything should get realigned. When we've all gone off course, and where am I out of whack? So what I usually do really almost around every Jewish holiday, and this is where I'm hoping people might write in the chat, if the chat is open. I forgot to ask you that, Alyssa. But if other people have other practices or things that are very helpful to you on a regular basis, I realize there's probably 3 things I do almost around every single Jewish holiday. One is I read. I like to read. So I'm a reader. So I'll read a special book, or I'll start, reading particular blogs or posts, or, whatever it is that I find spiritually inspiring that relate to that particular holiday. And for high holidays, for many years now, I've been reading every year Rabbi Alan Liu's book, which probably many of you know, This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. And the subtitle is The Days of Awe as a Journey of Transformation. And every year I get something more out of it. I also, when possible, try to attend at least one, and sometimes more, some kind of experiential workshop or program to get ready for the holidays. Sometimes I might be leading it or co-leading it, but I'd like to also go to ones that other people are leading and co-leading. And this year I went to a workshop led by Rabbi Tirza Firestone, who is a Jewish renewal rabbi who runs a contemplative center in LA called Metivta. And she shares Jewish and Hasidic teachings about the holiday. We usually do some chanting. She does a lot of breakout groups, or she calls them breakthrough groups, where you talk in, with just a handful of other people about, the topics and issues that we're going through. She walked us through every single month of the year and invited us to, do a review of what happened in our own lives individually and in the lives of the nation or the world, our collective lives. And she focused on, the 3 most important relationships. And I think this language comes from the Talmud, looking at Beni Latzmi, our relationship with ourselves, Beni Lachaverai, with our friends and family, and Beni Lamakom, the relationship with God, or as she sometimes says, twig, that which is greater than I, that which is greater than all of us. And then, you, in your groups or in your journal, I sit down and I make the lists, so how was I with my self-care this year? Physically, my mental health, how going over what are the key relationships and who do I need to clean up stuff with this year? And, who do I want to appreciate more? And who do I need to go ask for forgiveness from? And I have to tell you, this year was really probably the most challenging year I've ever had around that. I mean, I'm big into relationships and communication, so I feel like I tend to have very harmonious relationships with people in my life, and I'm big on communication and honesty and openness, and so I sort of try to clean up my messes as I go along. So there, usually isn't any kind of big mess at the end of the year. But this particular year, I happened to have a really, really difficult thing happen with my extended family over July 4th. It had a racial component, which was particularly painful because that's the work that I do and I'm supposed to be so skillful at it. And there were a number of people, it was close family, close friends, my own children, my siblings. And it just really took an inordinate amount of time, emotional energy, and courage. I have to say, it really reminded me just how much koach, just how much energy it really takes to put yourself in front of somebody and say, tell me how my behavior landed on you, even though it might be really, really uncomfortable for me to hear it. And can I hold space for you to tell me that without getting defensive? Can I hear your perspective and your experience and resist the temptation to say, but wait a minute, that isn't what I meant. You took it the wrong way, which may be true. And it doesn't change the fact that this person is before me saying I have caused harm to them. And what's really most important to me, or in doing teshuvah or being in alignment, is facing that, is acknowledging it, is apologizing for it, and is trying to make repair. And it just happened in such an intense way this year that it was just extremely sobering, humbling, draining. And so, I just wanted to share that because to just acknowledge for all of us anytime who put ourselves out there to do this, real work, this most important work of our lives. It's not easy. I might start to cry. So I know it's already 8:58, so I'm going to see if I can, anything else I want to say to just wrap up. Biggest challenge in my
that you did. You do the self-care.
Oh yes, the self-care. Thank you. The experiential workshop, and then the ritual. What's the ritual? Which may be a particular service, maybe davening, maybe it's davening in addition to the home ritual, whether it's the seder or apples and honey, or doing something in the sukkah. It's whatever the ritual is, or else some other kind of ceremony that often for me, I enjoy, because I'm so into Jewish renewal, more, creative rituals around something that may be in addition to the traditional, or maybe taking it in a little bit of a different direction. So those are the three things: reading, experiential, and then doing something that's ritual, doing something sacred. And I'll just finish by saying that I'm particularly aware. So my father-in-law was alive, one Rosh Hashanah, and then he wasn't. And now my 90-year-old mother-in-law, who we just moved to assisted living in Providence, I'm very aware as we open the book, as we look at the book of life or death, or, in between, whatever it is, it's particularly poignant to me how much her life is in the balance this year, but really it is all of us. It's always all of us. And, that alone should wake us up. And I, for one, am just really aware of the ways in which I want to try to do better. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Judy. And thank you for the courage to share your formula for how you approach the season, and especially that hard episode of having the courage. And I think that it really is probably part of the hardest part to overcome, or to have enough of, is that courage we all want that to get to the end, but we may not want what happens along the way to get there. So I bless you that you should have success in that realm, that you should have the courage that you need to be able to renew those relationships in very meaningful and warm and loving ways in such a way that they're even better than they were before. If you'd like to stay, it is 9 o'clock. You are certainly always welcome to leave, but if anybody had any comments, anybody had any questions, anybody have anything about their processes or their perspectives on the season they would like to share with our group, we're a safe group, and I think it's a very, I know that our speakers have given us food for thought in terms of how to approach the season, how they approach the season, what there is to think about at this time as we enter into Rosh Hashanah and then the 10 days leading up to Yom Kippur and beyond. So I don't know if anybody, I know there's a lot of really amazing, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful women in this group. So please feel free to just unmute yourself or say hello or wish a happy new year or bless somebody or whatever it is that you want to do. Don't be shy, please, if anybody would like to share and unmute themselves and just share something. Betsy, go.
I would just like to say thank you so much. How beautiful, because we're kind of doing everything that you've all talked about. We're actually doing right now as we're meeting and thinking and sharing, and it's just beautiful. Thank you so much.
I was struck by something that Rabbi Gila said about the time right after 9/11 being a powerful time, just like the time after the pandemic, which is actually not after because we're still in the middle of it. And I was thinking, you know, there's one really big difference. I was living in New York City right during 9/11 and after, and people really came together and held hands and supported one another, and let me get you some milk and let me help you, and you cross the street first and your car goes first. And the opposite is happening now. And I feel that so strongly, that this is not a time where people are giving graciousness. This is really, you know, such a different time where everyone's distrustful of one another instead of more trusting of one another. And, you know, I kind of yearn for finding a way back to that, where we all experience crisis together and then we hold hands and find our way through it that way.
It's a funny time now because we're sort of experiencing it similar, different places, and sort of experiencing it differently. I'm part of something called the Pandemic Journaling Project, where every week, I get sent an email of what are you thinking about and how's the pandemic affecting you? And one of the questions was, when did you first realize how big a deal this was? And my answer was when I got an email from somebody I don't hear from often who was in Australia. And this was April a year ago. And it just showed to me how it is everywhere. And I think now it's hard because we're in different stages, and some groups are further along, and some people, politics has gotten into it, but there is still that sense that it's everywhere. And I think it's important we keep that in mind, even though we're having differences in how we're coping and what we're doing. And even if people say it's not affecting them, it is, you know, some more, some less, but it is.
So my daughter lives in Holland, and so for different holidays, we go back and talk about different family dinners, different rituals we used to do. What grade was she in, you know, and what happened at the Purim Spiel when she was 7, or so for each one, there ends up being a different theme. So for us, it's also been since we aren't together now, but a looking back that gives each one of us a continuity, even though we hardly ever see each other, and no matter what, we know we're sharing something that's really important going forward too.
All right. Anybody else have any last Gila?
So I want to share with you a very little ditty that's found in traditional holiday prayer books, high holiday prayer books in Machzor. And it goes like this. Tichle shana v'kileloteha, techel shana uvirchoteha. So Tichle shana is that let the old year end with all of its curses, all of its negativity, all of its problems, all its sorrows. Techel shana uvirchoteha, let the new year begin with all its blessings. And this feels like a really wonderful way to begin the new year. I want to thank you, Alyssa.
Amen.
Just
Amen. So
honored to be part of it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was so excited when you all agreed. So I have a story I heard, and it's a Holocaust story, but I think it's a very powerful story. And it's a story about these guys. I don't know the exact details, but they were in this bunk and they weren't allowed to play cards, and they were playing cards. And the guard was coming down the hallway, and they heard him coming, and they knew they weren't allowed to play cards. So they quickly pretended they were asleep. The guard came in. They looked like they were sleeping. He left. They got the cards back out. He thinks that he comes back again, like, then he says, now I know you're playing cards. It's like searching for the cards, and he can't find the cards, but there's nowhere to hide the cards, right? They're sleeping on slats of wood. There's nowhere to hide the cards. And then the guard leaves, and this one guy goes, so who wants to play cards? And he goes, well, where did you put them? Like, how is it possible that you still have this pack of cards? And how come the guard didn't find it? And he said, well, I'm an amazing pickpocket. And so when the guard came in, I put them in his pocket because I knew he wasn't going to look in his pocket, right? He's going to look everywhere else. He's going to look here and there, but he's not going to look in his pocket. And then as he's leaving, I take it back out of his pocket. And so the message is sometimes we're looking everywhere else for whatever it is, fill in the blank. And it's right here. It's right in our pocket. It's right in our soul. It's right inside of us. And maybe that's another word of sort of inspiration to leave on, that as much as we're looking out, there's a lot to be gained by being able and having the courage to look in. And on that note, I wish you all a really healthy and a meaningful and a inspired holiday season. And if you want to go to the mikveh on the Sunday before Yom Kippur, I'm attending. I don't have to watch. You can go in on your own, but I have the key to the mikveh. So anybody who wants to go to the mikveh on the Sunday before Yom Kippur, please be in touch and come to our sukkah. We have a lovely sukkah we make out of corn stalks. Please come and have some soup and a l'chaim, some wine or whatever, whiskey in our sukkah. Please come. And I wish you all a really wonderful and a healthy and a happy and a meaningful and a spiritual and an uplifting and all of that new year. Closing the meeting.
Thanks to all of you. Amen.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Alyssa, thank you to all
Eshukah.
the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the presenters.
All of